Hello YouTube friends, welcome everyone. Before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. The House of Whispers, Chapter 1, The Rue du Maine Contract. New Orleans had always smelled of mystery. The thick humidity of the Mississippi mingled with the scent of spices, aged rum, incense, and something else. Something that caught in the throat, like the taste of unconfessed fear. That city, with its wrought iron balconies and dark alleys, seemed alive, as if it breathed through every crack of its colonial buildings, as if the centuries had left not only history, but also presences. Elena Duarte was an art restorer of Cuban descent, recently arrived from Miami. She'd been given a special job to restore an old house in the French Quarter, located at 237 Rue du Maine. The property, built in 1823, had belonged to the Beauchamp family, one of the most influential in Creole New Orleans. According to records, the house had been closed since 1946, after the mysterious disappearance of its last heir. What convinced Elena to accept the job was neither the salary nor the promise of renown. It was a black and white photo she found in a historical archive, where a woman very much like her, same bone structure, same deep-eyed gaze, posed on the balcony of the house, dressed in late 19th century attire. The caption read, Clotilde Beauchamp, 1887, the first day he set foot on the threshold of the house. The atmosphere changed. It was a hot July afternoon. Outside, tourists were strolling with their daiquiris. Street musicians were playing jazz with equal parts melancholy and joy. But inside the house, a thick, almost aggressive silence reigned. The walls seemed to absorb the sound, as if they wanted to keep the voices trapped inside. The key, old and heavy, clicked into the lock with a squeak. The door opened as if it had been waiting. Dust floated in beams of light, coming through the shutters. There was the smell of old wood, mildew, and something else. Something metallic, like rusty blood. Elena began her work methodically. She took photographs, cataloged the furniture covered with yellow sheets, and recognized some 19th century craft techniques. On the second floor, she found a room locked with a chain on the inside. He forced the door carefully, without breaking the original structure. Inside, everything was intact. There was a canopied bed, green velvet curtains, a padlocked trunk, and on the wall, a blackened mirror. The room smelled of dried lavender and something else. A dense, ancient, feminine perfume. Touching the mirror, Elena felt an electric shock run through her fingers. She jerked her hand away, but the reflection had not moved at the same time. Her image seemed to have remained a fraction of a second behind, as if the glass doubted her existence. A shiver ran down his spine. That night, he returned to his lodging in a small apartment, rented through an AP. It was located in Marigny, a few blocks from the French Quarter. He thought about Clotilde. Why did he look so much like her? He did a little more research and found that Clotilde had been accused of witchcraft and mysteriously disappeared in 1888, leaving a trail of blood at the front door and black candles burning in every corner of the living room. Her body was never found. The next morning, Elena returned to the house. Everything was the same, except for one detail. The chain she had broken in Clotilde's room was back in place. perfectly locked. She thought maybe she had forgotten to search it properly. But as she looked at the previous day's photos on her camera, she noticed something frightening. In the last image of the room, in the reflection of the mirror, a female figure could be seen standing behind her. She was wearing an antique dress, and her face was Elena's. With his heart pounding, he returned to the room. This time, he brought a voice recorder as a precaution. He turned on the device and began to speak aloud, narrating what he saw. As he walked toward the mirror, the temperature dropped sharply. The steam from his breath became visible, even though it was over 30 degrees outside. "I'm in front of the mirror. There's some kind of mark," he said, moving closer. On the surface, he noticed something engraved by hand, invisible until the light struck at a certain angle. It was an inscription in Old French. "Ce qui entre ici n'en sort pas sans dette." He translated it in a low voice. "Whoever enters here does not leave without debt." As he reviewed the recording that night, he found something disturbing. Right after her sentence, a voice whispered behind the audio, "Elena." It was not her voice. Over the next few days, unexplainable things began to happen. Tools would change places. The lights flickered only when she approached the second floor. The clock stopped at exactly 3:17 a.m., a time when, according to local legends, spirits are said to have free passage between dimensions. And every night, Elena dreamed of Clotilde. She saw her standing in front of an altar, surrounded by black candles, uttering words in a guttural tongue. She would offer her a bowl full of blood, and behind her, there were hooded figures, muttering in circles. In all the dreams, Clotilde ended up looking her in the eyes and saying, "You are the key. Only you can open the door." Elena could no longer sleep well. She decided to visit an esoteric store on Rue Chartres, recommended by a cab driver. There she met Mama Odette, an 80-year-old voodoo priestess, blind from birth, but who seemed to see more than anyone else. "Did you go into the Beauchamp house?" asked Mama Odette, without Elena saying anything. "Yes, I'm restoring it." "Restoring her or waking her up?" Elena was silent. "That house doesn't sleep. It waits. It has waited more than 100 years for someone with your blood. Clotilde didn't die. She changed." "What do you mean by changed?" he offered. "He sealed a pact, and blood calls to blood." "What kind of pact?" "One that does not end with death." Mama Odette handed him a little velvet bag with black salt, dried petals, and a small bone. "Put this under the bed on the second floor. If you get it back at dawn, you can't leave." Elena, terrified, did so that same night. At dawn, when she entered the room, the envelope was on the floor, open, the bone broken. She couldn't hold back the tears. Something had awakened, something that knew her by name, face, and blood. And then she understood. She didn't just look like Clotilde. She was her descendant. That night, Elena did not sleep. She heard footsteps in her apartment, although no one lived with her. The bathroom mirror fogged by itself, and a phrase written with an invisible finger appeared on the glass. "You opened me up. Now you owe me." Chapter 2. The Swamp of Echoes. Elena stopped coming to the house for the next 3 days. She stayed in her apartment in Marigny, with the blinds closed and the phone on airplane mode, trying to sleep for even an hour at a time. But rest was no more. Every time he closed his eyes, he returned to the same dream. The altar, the black candles, the chanting in a dead language, and Clotilde's face, which now seemed more like his own. The most frightening thing was that he could no longer distinguish the moment when he stopped dreaming. Sometimes he would wake up with marks on his arms, as if someone had held him during the night. One morning he discovered a word written on his inner thigh with something that looked like ash. Come. That word was repeated, physically, on the fourth day. He was in the kitchen preparing coffee when he heard a light knock on the door. When he opened the door, there was no one there. But on the doormat, he found an old, yellowed sheet of paper, written in blue ink. Rue Bayou Street, John, house without number. The swamp awaits you. That's where it all began. Elena knew she should ignore him, throw the leaf away, walk away. She could leave New Orleans that afternoon, catch a flight back to Miami or anywhere. But the feeling was different. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a need pressing against his ribs inside, like a command coming from his blood. He felt he had to do it, as if a destiny buried in generations was knocking on his door. Renting a car was easy. Rue Bayou Street. John was an area where the city was beginning to tangle with the marshes. Streets that narrowed to dirt roads, trees that curved with centuries of moisture over cars, and a lingering fog that seemed to be exhaled from the ground itself. After more than 30 minutes on paths with no clear signs, he found what he was looking for. A small house made of rotten wood, hidden behind a group of weeping willows. It had no number. The windows were boarded up, and the door, though closed, had no lock. Only a rusty iron pendant in the shape of an eye. He entered. The darkness was thick, but not silent. There were whispers, not definite voices, but murmurs that crept through the walls, through the floor, through the cracks. There was a strong smell of damp, wet earth and wax. Inside, he found what appeared to be an ancient altar, a hand-carved structure with symbols he didn't recognize, covered with melted candles, black feathers, beaded necklaces, and a wooden-carved figure depicting a woman with her face covered by snakes. In a corner, she saw something that drew her back. A series of framed antique portraits, all of women who looked like her. Some with early 20th century hairstyles, some dressed in robes, some even in daguerreotypes. They all had the same facial structure, the same dark eyes. "They are all me," she whispered. A voice answered him from somewhere in the house. "No, they went before. You are the last." Elena turned suddenly, but no one was there. The temperature dropped sharply. The door behind her slammed shut. She tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. At that moment, something on the altar lit by itself. A black candle. Suddenly, everything in the house changed. The floor creaked, as if breathing. The walls began to hum, and from every portrait a kind of dark mist floated in the air, hovering as if watching. Elena felt the air thicken. Her vision blurred, and then appeared in front of her. Clotilde. It was not a classical apparition. It was physical, corporeal. She wore an antique dress with blackened edges. Her hair was tied back with combs, and in her hands she held a book. "The lineage must be closed," said Clotilde. "The contract was signed with the blood of the first. Only the last one can release it." "What contract?" "Why me? Because you have the gift. Because you listen when others don't hear. Because you have the mark." Then Clotilde opened the book. The pages were made of leather, not paper, and on each one, written in letters of blood, was the story of a woman. Her name, her date of birth, her life, her end. "These are the women of the Beauchamp line. Each one paid her price. Each one fed the house. You will be the last, the one who must decide. Elena didn't know what to answer. She wanted to run, but her feet wouldn't move. The buzzing of the walls intensified. You can free them, said Clotilde, but only if you take their place. What if I don't? Then they will all remain trapped. You will live, but you will never rest. And when you die, you will come back here, again and again, just like everyone else. At that instant, the voices in the walls began to shout. They were no longer whispers. They were wails. Hundreds of voices. Some were pleading. Others cursed. Some were calling her name. Elena, free us. She closed her eyes. She fell to her knees. And then something changed. The altar shook. The book fell to the floor. And suddenly, at the bottom of the altar, a hatch opened. Inside there was a box. Elena opened it slowly. Inside was a ritual dagger. Its hilt was made of bone, and on the blade, engraved with fire, was a symbol, the same one he saw in Clotilde's room. If you want to break the cycle, said Clotilde, you must seal the blood with will, yours. Elena trembled. She understood what it meant. She was not to die. She was only to bleed willingly, as proof of surrender, as an act of faith. He cut his palm with the dagger. A drop fell to the ground, and then everything burst into light. The voices stopped. The humming stopped. The air became clear, and the door opened of its own accord. When he emerged, the swamp was no longer shrouded in fog. The sun was rising. He returned to his apartment with the feeling of having escaped from a dream, but the scar was still on his hand. And on his desk, the next day, he found the book. There was only one blank page left. Yours. Chapter 3. The Last Name. Elena tried to burn the book. He doused it with alcohol, enclosed it in a metal box, and threw it into the fire. The flames grew rapidly, engulfing the box as if hungry. But when they died down, the book was still there, untouched. Its dark leather, the seams made of sinew, the one blank page, still clean, still waiting. That night he dreamed of what? I was standing in the middle of a black lagoon. The sky was red. Tree branches hung like claws. Beneath the surface of the water, something was moving. Something she couldn't see, but she knew it had been watching her forever. When he woke up, he felt different. He was not afraid. He had a certainty. He understood what he had to do. The book was not just a record, not just a curse. It was a key. He returned to the house, not out of impulse, but out of purpose. He drove at night, in the pouring rain. The time there was no fog. The route seemed to be waiting for her, like a corridor widening to receive the destined traveler. When he arrived, he found it different. The house no longer looked old. The wood had returned to its original color. The windows were clean, and over the porch an oil lamp hung burning. He entered. Inside they were waiting for her. Clotilde was in the center of the room, and around her, all the women. Not in portraits, not in shadows. They were there, dressed in clothes from different centuries, silent, beautiful, sad. "Why am I here again?" Elena asked. "Because you haven't chosen yet." Clotilde answered, "I already bled for you. I opened the door. I freed you. You gave us a way out, but you're still inside." Elena looked at her hands. The scar still burned. The book weighed in her purse like a hot stone. She pulled the book out and held it in front of them. "What am I supposed to do?" he whispered. One of the women stepped forward. She was a girl, no older than 12. Her dress was 19th century, her face full of freckles. "Write your story. Only then will the book close." "What if I don't write it?" The Lamentations of the Dumas House. Chapter 1. The Whisper of the French Quarter. When Elise Laurent arrived in New Orleans one overcast November afternoon, the humidity embraced her like an ancient spirit, warm and sticky, as if the city itself was welcoming her with a crooked smile. She had traveled from Chicago, escaping the noise, the pain, a recent loss she hadn't known how to process. Her mother, a Louisiana native, had died just 3 months ago, and with her death, Elise had inherited a house in the heart of the French Quarter. The old Dumas house, a forgotten mansion her mother always avoided mentioning. The property was not listed in tourist records. No one spoke of it, yet it stood proudly among the cobblestone streets and wrought iron balconies, surrounded by hanging moss and long shadows. The cab dropped her off in front of a rusty gate whose creak echoed like a human groan as she pushed it. The house was a sleeping monster. 3 stories of black wood, blind windows, and an upper dome where the reflections of the sunset danced like fatuous fires. There was something strange in the silence of the place. Despite being in the bustling French Quarter, the land where it rested seemed isolated from the world, as if it had been plucked from another dimension and placed there by mistake. Elise entered cautiously. The key she had been given fit with difficulty, as if the lock had been waiting for decades. As she opened the front door, a smell of dampness and wilted flowers enveloped her. The air was heavy, laden with more than just dust. The walls were covered with old portraits, serious faces, sad looks, all with eyes that were too vivid. "Hello," she whispered, without knowing why. The floor creaked under her footsteps, and she immediately felt a presence. It was not tangible. It was more of a gut instinct. Something or someone was watching her. She set her suitcase down next to a dusty spiral staircase and climbed up to the master bedroom, where she found a bed covered with white sheets. She carefully removed it, and as she did so, saw something move out of the corner of her eye. He turned sharply, but there was nothing. The woman who introduced herself as Madame Laveau dropped the cup she was washing. "Girl, are you sleeping in that house?" "Yes." "Why?" Madame Laveau held his hand tightly. Her eyes were full of fear. "No one has lived there since 1932. It is a marked place. It was the home of voodoo, of ancient pacts, and of the last witch of the Dumas family, Celestine Dumas, your great-great-grandmother." He paused, staring at her. She didn't die. She was imprisoned, alive, in the walls of that house. Her spirit is awake, and you have nourished it by entering. It carries the blood. Elise didn't know what to say. The words choked her. She didn't believe in witchcraft, but she couldn't deny what she had felt either. Madame Laveau took an amulet out of her apron and handed it to him. "Wear it tonight, and don't look in the mirrors. Don't answer if you hear your name after midnight." That evening, back at the Dumas house, Elise placed the amulet around her neck, but she couldn't resist the temptation to examine the mirrors. One in particular, in the second-floor hallway, looked new, as if someone had recently polished it. When he stood in front of it, he did not see his reflection. She saw another version of herself, a woman with her face, but with paler skin, flowing hair, and empty eyes. "Elise," said the reflection in a dry whisper. She stepped back. She stumbled. She fell to the ground. The mirror shattered, but the reflection did not disappear. It came out of the glass in the form of a shadow. And then he heard his mother's voice, distant, trembling, mixed with an older, deeper one. Run, Elise. Don't look her in the eye. But it was too late. Celestine had seen her. Chapter 2. The Curse of the Black Mirror. Elise's scream tore through the air like a blade. The shadow that had emerged from the mirror stretched down the hallway, carrying with it a bone-chilling chill. The figure had the shape of a woman, but its outline was fluid, like oily smoke. Her face formed and distorted in a perpetual grimace, as if hundreds of faces were trying to emerge at the same time. Elise ran without looking back. She stumbled down the stairs, feeling each step of the entity echoing over her own, but slower, as if she was in no hurry. The front door would not open. The wood vibrated with an invisible force, as if the house was breathing. He knocked, shouted, pulled the doorknob, but nothing. Only the silence of the house broken by an ever closer whisper. Elise, blood of my blood, the door no longer exists for you. The whisper came from everywhere and nowhere. In an instant, the temperature dropped so low that her breath turned to steam and tears froze in her eyes. The amulet around her neck began to heat up, vibrating as if it had a life of its own. A red light burst from it, and the shadow stopped. With trembling hands, Elise tore off the amulet and hurled it at the figure. There was a deafening shriek, as if 1,000 voices were screaming from the depths of a tomb. The shadow dissolved momentarily, and the door burst open on its own, ejecting her into the street. She ran aimlessly until the cobblestone streets of the French Quarter led her back to Madame Laveau's cafe. When she burst into the room, panting, covered with dust and blood from a small wound on her forehead, Madame Laveau was already waiting for her. She held in her hand a wooden bowl filled with bird bones, lighted black candles, and a round mirror covered with a veil. "You've already woken Celestine," he said without looking up. "Now she will haunt you, not just because of what you are, but because of what's inside you." Elise did not understand. What's inside me? Madame Laveau looked at her with a grave expression. She sat down opposite her and removed the veil from the mirror. It was no ordinary mirror. The glass was black, like obsidian. Its surface rippled slightly, as if it contained a thick liquid. Celestine Dumas was a powerful mambo, a priestess of ancestral voodoo, but she was also a heretic. She crossed boundaries that even the Loas, the spirits, fear. She encased her soul in mirrors to circumvent death. Part of her, she entered your bloodline. You are not only her blood, you are her receptacle. Elise felt a shiver. It couldn't be true. Her mother had never told her about this. Never. "What can I do?" he asked in a broken voice. Madame Laveau lit a new candle, this time white. The flame flickered brightly. "You must return to the house. Only there can you face her. There is a ritual, dangerous. It requires you to enter the Black Mirror with the guidance of a Loa protector. I will summon Papa Legba, the guardian of the gates, but you must offer something in return." "What?" "A pure memory, something you love deeply, and you must be willing to lose it." Elise didn't have much, but she pulled from her jacket pocket an antique locket, a miniature photograph of her mother embracing her as a child. She placed it in the center of Laveau's altar. The woman nodded slowly. "Then get ready. Tonight, you will travel between worlds." The full moon rose over New Orleans like a cursed lantern. The bells of St. Louis Cathedral echoed in the distance as Elise, with the Black Mirror under her arm, returned to the Dumas house. No shadow dared to cross her path. The city seemed to hold its breath, as if it knew a battle was about to begin. Upon arrival, the house seemed different, more alive or more rotten. The windows wept a black liquid, and the wood creaked without wind. Upon entering, there were no whispers, just a voice, deep and guttural. "Welcome back, Elise." She placed the black mirror on the floor of the main room. The candles were lit without her having touched them. She began to recite the words Madame Laveau had taught her. "Papa Legba, open the door. I pass through, you guide me. I offer what I love. You protect me from the abyss." The mirror began to glow, not with light, but with darkness. A mist emerged from its center and enveloped Elise. She felt her body being sucked in, as if her soul was falling down a bottomless pit. Then, nothing. When she opened her eyes, she was not in the house. He was inside the mirror, so it was a distorted version of the world. The sky was red, the earth was ash, and Dumas' house loomed even larger, twisted like a nightmarish painting. The shadows walked by themselves, and from the top of the tower, a figure watched her, Celestine. The witch descended slowly, levitating. She wore a black lace dress. Her hair floated around her like snakes, and her eyes were nothing but infinite emptiness. "At last, my blood," he said in a gentle voice. "Why do you fight against your heritage? This power belongs to you. My spirit lives in you." Elise stepped back. "You murdered innocents. You sold your soul. And what is a soul compared to eternity? Take a good look." Celestine raised a hand, and the landscape changed. "Here are your ancestors, all those who betrayed me." Human figures appeared, trapped in the trees, the walls, the floors. They screamed without a voice. They cried without tears. "Your mother wanted to deny me. She wanted to cut the tie. But you came to me. You opened the door." Elise pulled a ceremonial dagger from her pocket. She didn't know how to use it, but Madame Laveau had told her that she should plunge the steel into her darkest reflection. Then he understood. He was not supposed to kill Celestine. She had to kill herself, inside the mirror. She ran towards the lake of darkness that reflected her corrupted form. And Elise, with empty eyes, cruel smile, skin covered with voodoo symbols. The figure was waiting for her. When she raised her knife, so did her reflection. "If you destroy me, you will never wake up," said his image, identical and monstrous. "Maybe," Elise whispered, "but neither are you." And he plunged the dagger into his chest. Celestine's scream was the last thing he heard. When she awoke, she was on the living room floor, surrounded by ashes. The mirror was shattered. Madame Laveau was beside her, tears in her eyes. "You survived, but at a price." Elise looked at her hands. Her fingernails were black, her veins marked with symbols she didn't remember tattooing. She had survived, but something of Celestine still lived in her. "And now?" he asked. "Now," said Madame Laveau gravely, "the real hell begins." Chapter 3. Echoes that don't sleep. The weeks following the ritual slipped away like a heavy, dense fog that never completely dissipates. Elise no longer lived at Dumas' house. After the confrontation with Celestine, the structure began to crumble, not visibly, but spiritually. The walls oozed dried blood. The mirrors were fogging up from the inside. At midnight, the porch lights would turn on by themselves, and from within came murmurs that spoke ancient languages. The authorities did not intervene. No one in New Orleans wanted to get too close to that house. The French Quarter, with all its history of enchantments and legends, had learned to respect certain limits, and the Dumas house from that day on became one of them. Elise took refuge in a small rented room above an old apothecary not far from Chartres Street. The place smelled of rue, cloves, and damp wood. Madame Laveau visited him occasionally, bringing infusions, protective runes, and veiled warnings. But Elise was no longer sleeping. Since the ritual, his body resisted sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard a voice inside his head, whispering names of the dead, fragments of chants in the African language, and sometimes the sound of fingernails scraping wood from inside his own skull. The Black Mirror had been destroyed, yes, but something of him, or her, lived inside it. One night, while looking in the bathroom mirror, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Her reflection did not imitate her. Not right away, at least. It was subtle, barely a flicker of difference, a blink of an eye that was delayed, a turn of the head that was half a second late, as if the reflection needed to remember how to move. And then, in an instant that lasted an eternity, his reflection smiled of its own accord. Elise broke the mirror. Each piece dropped to the floor had its own distorted face. Everyone was smiling. In desperation, she returned to Madame Laveau, who was waiting for her with a haggard face and sadder eyes than ever. The curse didn't end, did it? No, said the old woman. She just mutated. Celestine did not seek to possess you, Elise. She turned you into a portal, a rift between the world of the living and the world of the renegade Loas. And what does that mean? That as long as you live, their world will seep into ours. You are an open wound. Things pass through you that should not cross. Can I close it? Madame Laveau sighed. Only one way. You must seal Celestine's soul forever, but you can no longer do it yourself. You're contaminated. We need someone else. Someone who will volunteer and be willing to bear her shadow. Who would do that? Madame Laveau did not answer. Instead, she spread out on the table an old photograph. A little boy, no more than 8 years old, playing in an old garden. On the back, in faded ink, was written a name: Ephraim Dumas. I'm not the only one who descended from it, said Elise, in a hollow voice. Who is it? An orphan from across the river. He lives in a hospice. He has never known his story. But it's in his blood, just like you. Elise looked at the photo for a long time. The child's innocence hit her like a knife. Would she be able to drag him into this horror? You must warn him, Madame Laveau insisted. But if he accepts, he will be the one to fight the last battle. Elise crossed the Mississippi by ferry, alone, with the salty wind hitting her face and a sense of defeat sinking into her chest. The hospice where Ephraim lived was on a hill surrounded by ancient oak trees and damp earth. The building was red brick with moss-covered white columns. A nun received her kindly without questions, as if her presence had been expected. She pointed her to the back garden, where Ephraim was playing with a rag ball. Ephraim, said Elise softly. The boy looked up. He had the same eyes as she did, gray, almost white, like mist. She felt a shiver. Are you my mom? The question crushed her insides. She knelt down in front of him. Number but? I am someone like you. Like me? Elise nodded. Someone who hears things in mirrors, who dreams of shadows even when awake. Ephraim's face darkened. He nodded slowly. Last night, a woman spoke to me from the bath water. She told me it was my grandmother. Elise felt her heart stop. Celestine had already found him. "Ephraim," he said urgently, "I need you to come with me. There's a way to put her away for good, but I need your help. I can't do it alone." "What if I don't want to? She will come for you anyway." The boy, braver than she herself felt, nodded. He took her hand. "Let's go." The last night fell like a slab over the city. The sky turned purple, and thunderless lightning ripped through the clouds. Elise and Ephraim stood before the Dumas house. The windows looked like open eyes. The door opened by itself. Inside, the darkness was total. Only one room remained intact, the old sewing room where Celestine had performed her rituals. The air smelled of rotting incense, of cemetery soil. In the center, a figure awaited them. Celestine, no body, only a shadow sustained by hatred. "At last, my pure blood," he said, looking at Ephraim. "Come, my son, come to me." Ephraim trembled. Elise hugged him, murmuring in his ear, "Remember what you saw, remember what you are, and remember that you have something she doesn't, love." The child closed his eyes. In his hands, Madame Laveau had entrusted him with a Loa gem, a white stone that responded only to pure spirit. When he held it, it began to glow with a soft light, like that of dawn. Celestine's shadow shrieked, "No, you cannot destroy me. I am your blood." "No," Ephraim said firmly. "You are what I choose not to be." And he threw the gem on the ground. The light expanded like an explosion of silence. The shadow broke into screams. The mirrors in the house exploded one by one. The walls creaked. An invisible storm shook the place. Elise took Ephraim by the hand, and they ran. When they got outside, the house began to collapse. Not into fire, not into rubble. It just disappeared, as if it had never been there. Weeks later, Elise and Ephraim were living together, far from New Orleans, in a town without mirrors. The nights were quiet, although Elise sometimes woke up shivering, expecting to hear a voice that was no longer there. But something had changed. Elise could now sleep, and for the first time in her life, to dream. Sometimes he dreamed of his mother, sometimes with Celestine, but he always woke up knowing there was someone else in the room, Ephraim, breathing peacefully, and that at last was enough. New Orleans, Louisiana, was a city of contrasts. Between the bustle of the French Quarter and the jazz that hung in the air, there were nooks and crannies where darkness clung like an ancient curse. There, in the nearby swamps, where cypress trees loomed like specters and the air smelled of moss and decay, legends came to life. It was an October night, when the wind carried whispers of another world. Claire Dubois, a young anthropology student, had come to town obsessed with voodoo stories and tales of apparitions. Her research had led her to an old cabin on the banks of the bayou, owned by her great-uncle, a man of whom little was known, except that he had disappeared decades before without a trace. The cabin, built on rotting wooden stilts, swayed slightly in the breeze, as if breathing. Claire turned on her flashlight and stepped carefully forward, feeling the eyes of something or someone watching her from the thicket. "There's nothing here," she told herself, though her hands were shaking. As she crossed the threshold, the smell of damp and mildew enveloped her. The furniture was covered with dusty sheets, and ritual masks hung on the walls, their grotesque expressions frozen in silent screams. In the center of the room, an old leather-bound book rested on a table. Claire opened it carefully. The pages, yellowed and brittle, contained symbols she didn't recognize, inverted pentagrams, serpentine figures, and words in a dead language. On the last page, a handwritten note read, "Don't call them if you're not prepared to pay the price." A shiver ran down her spine. At that moment, the wind hit the windows hard, and someone whispered her name from outside. Claire. It was a rough voice, as if it had been dragged down by time. She held her breath. She was not alone. Outside, among the reeds, a tall, gaunt figure moved. His skin, pale and clammy, glistened under the moon. It had no eyes, only black cavities that seemed to absorb the light. "You've opened the book. Now they're coming." Claire stepped back, but the door slammed shut behind her. The candles in the room lit on their own, casting dancing shadows. From the walls, the masks began to laugh. And then the ground gave way. Something cold and wet grabbed her ankle, dragging her down into the depths of the swamp. The whisper of the swamp. It was the night of November 4th, 2019. Hector Lujan, a 47-year-old truck driver born in El Paso, Texas, was driving his white Kenworth, loaded with boxes of medicine, to Salt Lake City. He had left Farmington, New Mexico, late, and his plan was to get through Utah before dawn. He knew that stretch was strange. Everyone knew it, not because there was anything going on, but because there was too much going on. And at the same time, there was never anything left as proof. Hector was skeptical. He did not believe in ghosts. He didn't believe in UFOs or witches or the skinwalker the Navajo talked about. But that day, something made him doubt. At about 1:47 a.m., after leaving behind the last gas station in Monticello, he saw some lights that were not marked on the GPS. They were blinking softly, as if someone had left the high beams on in the middle of the desert, near an unnamed turnoff. The funny thing is that there was no exit at that point. Nothing. But there were the lights. He slowed down. The asphalt was silent. Just his truck, his breathing, and a subtle hum in the mirrors. As he passed by the spot, he saw out of the corner of his eye something that shouldn't have been there. Some kind of vehicle, covered in dust, half buried in the sand, with its headlights on, but no sign of movement. Hector slowed down some more. His instinct to help was strong. Something inside him, perhaps a remnant of humanity that had not been swallowed by the miles, told him that maybe someone needed help. He stopped. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no wind, nothing. He took the flashlight, put on his jacket, and got out of the truck. The air was cold, thick, as if the desert was breathing on its own. He took a few steps toward the vehicle. It was leaning, sunk in the sand, and didn't look like it had been touched in years. But the lights were still on, shining with an almost artificial intensity. Hector circled the car. There were no license plates. The body was metallic, but old-fashioned, as if it were a model from the 70s. No one was visible inside. He knocked on the window. Nothing. He knocked harder. Silence. It was then that he heard the first sound, a voice, distant, feminine, almost whispering, "Help me." Hector turned around suddenly. No one was there. He looked at the horizon, absolute darkness. He looked back at the car and again heard the voice, "Help me, please." It was coming from the back seat, but there was no one visible. He felt a shiver. He took a step back, and then the carriage lights went out all at once. Darkness. He ran back to his truck, stumbling over a rock. He opened the door, jumped in, locked the door, started the engine, and drove off without looking back. For 5 minutes he said nothing. His heart pounded as if he had run a marathon. The road returned to what it was, empty, black, indifferent. But the most disturbing thing wasn't what he saw. It was what he noticed when he checked his digital dashboard clock. By the time he had stopped, it was 1:47 a.m. By the time he returned to the road, it was 3:14 a.m. I had lost almost an hour and a half. There was no way. He had barely stopped for 10 minutes, if that. But something had held him back. Something, or someone. He tried to call his wife. No signal. He tried to turn on the radio. Only static. This is how he drove to Bluff. The next morning, still with an upset stomach, he arrived at a small coffee shop in Blanding, where several truckers were gathering to drink coffee and share stories before moving on. Hector didn't plan to say anything, but his face gave him away. An old man in a black cap looked at him and asked, "Route 191? Hector nodded. "Did you stop?" Again, he nodded. The old man let out a long sigh. It never stops. Even if you see someone, even if they beg you, even if you look like a lost child, you don't stop. No one does. No one who wants to come back with a whole mind, at least. Another younger truck driver approached. "Did you see the lights?" he asked in a serious tone. "Yes." The three looked at each other. The old man lowered his voice. That stretch, they closed it once, in the 80s. 3 cars disappeared. At first they said they were bandits or that they took wrong roads. But then one came back. A single man, walking in the sand, dehydrated, no tongue. He didn't speak, but he wrote. The last thing he wrote was, "She is trapped in the car. Don't listen to her. It's not her." Hector swallowed. And what happened to him? Died 3 days later. Fever, and his corpse disappeared from the morgue. Silence returned to the table. One of the truck drivers patted Hector on the shoulder. "You were not the first, but make sure you're the last." That same night, while sleeping in his cabin, he dreamed of the car, with the lights on, with a hand glued to the rear window, and the voice, that voice calling his name. No one turns on Route 191. He took the flashlight, put on his jacket, and got out of the truck. The air was cold, thick, as if the desert was breathing on its own. He took a few steps toward the vehicle. It was leaning, sunk in the sand, and didn't look like it had been touched in years. But the lights were still on, shining with an almost artificial intensity. Hector circled the car. There were no license plates. The body was metallic, but old-fashioned, as if it were a model from the 70s. No one was visible inside. He knocked on the window. Nothing. He knocked harder. Silence. It was then that he heard the first sound, a voice distant, feminine, almost whispering. "Help me." Hector turned around suddenly. No one was there. He looked at the horizon. Absolute darkness. He looked back at the car and again heard the voice. "Help me. Please." It was coming from the back seat, but there was no one visible. He felt a shiver. He took a step back, and then the carriage lights went out all at once. Darkness. He ran back to his truck, stumbling over a rock. He opened the door, jumped in, locked the door, started the engine, and drove off without looking back. For 5 minutes he said nothing. His heart pounded, as if he had run a marathon. The road returned to what it was. Empty, black, indifferent. But the most disturbing thing wasn't what he saw. It was what he noticed when he checked his digital dashboard clock. By the time he had stopped, it was 1:47 a.m. By the time he returned to the road, it was 3:14 a.m. I had lost almost an hour and a half. There was no way. He had barely stopped for 10 minutes, if that. But something had held him back. Something or someone. He tried to call his wife. No signal. He tried to turn on the radio. Only static. This is how he drove to Bluff. The next morning, still with an upset stomach, he arrived at a small coffee shop in Blanding, where several truckers were gathering to drink coffee and share stories before moving on. Hector didn't plan to say anything, but his face gave him away. An old man in a black cap looked at him and asked, "Route 191? Hector nodded. "Did you stop?" Again he nodded. The old man let out a long sigh. It never stops. Even if you see someone, even if they beg you, even if you look like a lost child, you don't stop. No one does. No one who wants to come back with a whole mind, at least. Another younger truck driver approached. "Did you see the lights?" he asked, in a serious tone. "Yes." The three looked at each other. The old man lowered his voice. "That stretch. They closed it once. In the 80s, 3 cars disappeared. At first they said they were bandits or that they took wrong roads. But then one came back. A single man, walking in the sand, dehydrated, no tongue. He didn't speak, but he wrote. The last thing he wrote was, 'She is trapped in the car. Don't listen to her. It's not her.'" Hector swallowed. And what happened to him? Died 3 days later. Fever, and his corpse disappeared from the morgue. Silence returned to the table. One of the truck drivers patted Hector on the shoulder. "You were not the first, but make sure you're the last." That same night, while sleeping in his cabin, he dreamed of the car, with the lights on, with a hand glued to the rear window, and the voice, that voice calling his name, a name he never said aloud that night. Chapter 2. She didn't stay in the car. The sun was barely rising over the Utah horizon when Hector Lujan started the engine of his Kenworth. He hadn't slept for more than an hour. His mouth was dry, and his eyes were sore. He dreamed of the voice, the same voice he heard the night before. But this time it wasn't a distant whisper. It was a scream that called his name. How could he explain that something had called his name when there was no human way for anyone to know who he was? Maybe, he thought, it had been tiredness, a hallucination, a bad move of his brain after hours on the road and little food. But something in his body told him otherwise. Something was not right. Before leaving Blanding, he stopped to buy a coffee at a convenience store. As he waited at the checkout counter, an elderly woman with slicked-back white hair and suntanned skin approached him without a word. She looked him in the eye, as if she knew him, and then, without asking permission, she touched his arm gently and said, "She didn't stay in the car, did she?" Hector remained motionless. The old woman did not wait for an answer. She placed a small wooden medallion with a cross in his hand and whispered to him, "Don't stop if he calls you again." Then he simply walked away, as if he had never been there. Hector looked at the cashier, hoping for some sign that she had seen him. But the young man was distracted by his cell phone. No one else seemed to have noticed. He put the medallion in his pocket and returned to the truck. A slight tremor ran through his fingers. It started up, and the trip continued north. By noon, Hector was crossing the open plains of Utah. The sky was vast and blue, without a cloud in sight. But even though the sun was shining, the air inside the truck was strange, colder than normal, as if the air conditioning system had turned itself on, even though it was off. The temperature went up. Nothing changed. Half an hour later, while crossing a lonely stretch, he noticed something in the rearview mirror. A silhouette, small, still, as if sitting in the rear bunk of the cabin. He turned suddenly. No one was there. He turned his eyes to the front, and at that moment he felt the buzzing sound, a high-pitched, thin sound, almost like an electric chirp, filled the cabin for 3 seconds, and faded away. It was the same buzzing sound I had heard on Route 191, just before it all started. He accelerated. For the rest of the day, he saw nothing again. He heard nothing. But the weight of the air in the cabin was like that of a room that had been closed for years. Dense, static, and the smell. A faint floral perfume, sweet and ancient, that he didn't recognize. Like wilted lilacs. That night, he arrived at a rest stop outside of Provo. He parked his truck, turned off the engine, and sat quietly. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't call anyone. He stared into the darkness. After midnight, he lay down on his bunk. He tried to pray, although he had not done so since he was a child. He repeated the Lord's Prayer like a mechanical whisper, while he clenched the wooden medallion in his fist. And then, the voice came back. "Hector, do you remember me?" He opened his eyes with a start. The cabin was dark, but the voice was clear, as if someone was talking to him from the passenger seat. "I didn't want to stay. You opened the door for me." Hector stood up. He took the flashlight, turned it on, pointed it in all directions. There was no one there, just him, the emptiness and that floral perfume, more intense now. He went back to bed. He did not sleep. At dawn, he noticed something more disturbing. The wooden medallion he kept in his pocket was gone. He checked the entire cabin. It was gone, as if he had never had it. For the next few hours, everything seemed to calm down. But as he drove north on his 15, Hector began to feel that he was not alone. He couldn't explain it, but at times the rear-view mirror would show fleeting shadows in the back seat. And at times, he heard breathing that wasn't his own. Once he could have sworn someone sobbed softly behind him. He stopped the truck at a rest area in Idaho, next to a rusty old station. He got out to get some air, hoping the breeze would clear it. It was there that he saw the sign nailed to a pole. "Have you seen this vehicle?" It was a picture of an old metal car, covered in sand, with its lights on. Exactly the same one he had seen on Route 191. The poster was old, yellowed, dated 1992. The report was of a missing family, a mother and her young daughter, never seen since. The mother's name was Lucille Martinez, and at the bottom, in small letters, "Be warned not to approach if you see the vehicle. Report to authorities. Keep your distance." Hector felt dizzy. He ran into the station bathroom and vomited. Later, he decided to sleep a little longer before continuing. He locked the truck, covered the windows, lay down on the bunk, and left the flashlight nearby. The dream did not come. At 2:33 a.m., he felt something move inside the truck. First a creaking sound, then a slight knocking sound at the rear, and then the sound of soft, shaky breathing next to his ear. He jumped out of bed, turned on the flashlight, turned in all directions. Nothing. But the internal rearview mirror was fogged up, as if someone had breathed right in front of it. And in the center, written with an invisible finger, was a sentence. I was already awake. Hector got off the truck. He walked to the station. He wanted to call for help, but that station was closed, empty, not a soul. Only the flickering lights of the old sign and the hum of the transformers. He looked toward his truck, and there he saw her, a female figure, sitting in the passenger seat. She did not move. She had no clear face, just long hair falling over her shoulders, motionless, staring straight ahead. He came back slowly. The truck was locked. There could be no one inside. But when she opened the door, the seat was damp, as if someone had sat on it minutes before. And on the bunk, on the blanket, she found a little pink bow, a girl's, worn by time. He could not take it anymore. He picked up his phone, dialed the Utah emergency number, and reported what had happened. He said something was following him, that he had seen the car, that he had heard voices. The operator was silent for a few seconds and then asked, "Sir, did you call yesterday from Monticello with this same report?" "Number, it's the first time I've called. We have a call logged with your number at 3:14 a.m. yesterday." He said he had found the car, but the call was cut off, and when we called him back, someone answered, but he was just crying. Hector hung up without saying more. That early morning, he restarted the engine and drove nonstop to Salt Lake City. But something was following him. It wasn't just the perfume or the whispers or the shadows. It was a presence, a consciousness. Lucille Martinez was no longer in the car, and she had chosen him. Chapter 3, What We Left Behind. Hector didn't remember much of the next night. He remembers the flickering lights on the highway, the sound of the engine roaring under his heavy foot, and the blurred horizon as he drove north across the endless desert plains.